Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well today. I wanted to make a tutorial about launches in Superliminal, since there isn't really a central resource for different launches for this game. It doesn't seem like. I think it'd be nice to just have a resource for new players to look at, just to get an idea of the basic mechanics that underlie different types of launches. So I figured I'd start out in Cubism, since this is one of the classic launches in the game, this cube launch used in Warpless. Yeah, so here we are. So the basic mechanic underlying every type of launch is the way the game resolves a situation where the player's hitbox, or rigid body, is overlapping an object's rigid body. So we've got the object here, and as you can see, we're the player, and the player's hitbox is invisible in this game, or at least during normal gameplay you can't see the boundaries, but like you can tell we're in contact with the cube right now, because we can't proceed any further. So basically the game doesn't like it when we clip inside an object, and the moment we do that, it launches us. Because this is actually sort of the default, it's called quote-unquote depenetration mechanism in Unity, is to just give the player upwards velocity until they're outside of the other rigid body. And of course we can use that to our advantage in a variety of ways. In special scenarios where giving the player upwards velocity wouldn't resolve the issue, the game will just teleport the player to the edge of the object. And so that's what you see in the 80% run of Superliminal with warps. That's basically the mechanic that causes warps to happen. I might do a tutorial in the future, or an explanation video in the future for warps, where I go into more detail about those, but for now I'm just going to stick with launches, because that's complicated enough for one video. It's worth noting that in more recent versions of the game, all launches are significantly affected by frame rate. 60 FPS is the advised frame rate for all speedrun categories, including categories that use launches. Other frame rates may or may not be allowed, but you're probably going to have to come up with some alternate routing if you want to play on a different frame rate, and you'll have to deal with your jump height being weird too, since jump height is also frame rate dependent in recent versions of the game. Yeah, so we'll start out with the classic jump launch here, this classic Cubism jump launch. And this is generally the main type of launch that's used to get out of bounds in, say, the warpless category of the game, in a couple different levels. Because it's useful because it allows you to get out of bounds with a bunch of extra upwards velocity, which is important because you have to traverse like really big distances between patches of level geometry, and you want to have plenty of upwards velocity so you don't just fall into the void. So to execute this launch, you want to make your object very large above you, and I recommend a few large drops to get it to get the bulk of the resizing done, since it's kind of slow if you just spam click like this. So best to do a few large drops, like 1, 2, and then spam click from there. Then up, boom, perfect. And I've got unlimited render distance on. Normally you wouldn't see the level geometry from here, but yeah. And there we are. So let's head back to the area back here. So the kind of mechanical thing, I'll just quickly go over like what's happening mechanically here, is I believe what's happening is you get stuck in the object, you clip into the object when you jump into it, right? And then the game, that depenetration mechanism kicks in, and it'll just boost you all the way up through the object, and because the object is very large, it's stuck against the ceiling, it'll just boost you up through the ceiling entirely. And due to, like, I believe it's a specific quirk of how this game's implementation of the Unity physics handles things, you keep the upwards velocity even after you are outside of the object. So you'll keep that upwards velocity, which allows you to cross the big gap and get over to the exit portal there. Alright, so the next type of launch I want to go over is the push launch. And it's worth noting here that the basic mechanic is always the same, the basic mechanic for launching. Regardless of how you do it, the trigger for a launch is always the player colliding with an object in some way, or overlapping an object, because it's always that same depenetration mechanism that causes the player to launch. So really it's just a matter of different scenarios. Each different type of launch is just a different scenario where we overlap an object. So for this next type, this is what we call the push launch or the slide launch. I typically like the push launch. I don't know, it just sounds good to me, but either one. And it's basically, yeah, same mechanism. We're getting into a situation where we can clip inside an object. But here, instead of using the ceiling as a solid surface to block the object and allow us to clip into it, we're going to use a wall. And this can be done with pretty much any object and any wall. So you want it to be about this size, whatever object you're using. You just want to place it up against the wall, and typically the way I like to do it is just hold W against the object and just quickly double click, maybe moving your mouse slightly down between the clicks, so like, not quite right, but like that. And as you get, like as you gain practice in push launches, you can find different methods that work best for you, different like cues or like different setups, but this is kind of a good basic one. It's just like that. Yeah, so that's the push launch. So this next launch is a bit of a special case. So this is essentially the same as an ordinary push launch, but with the extra caveat that it'll clip you through the ceiling and out of bounds. And the reason this works is basically it's a push launch, but the object is big enough that its hitbox extends all the way up to the ceiling. So when the game boosts you up through the object, it'll also boost you up through the ceiling, like with the jump launch, as described before. But here, you don't actually necessarily need to jump. You can if it helps, but primarily it's basically just a jump launch or a push launch, but it'll get you out of bounds. And this is useful in situations where it might be inconvenient to do a typical jump launch. So like, just drop it, push into it, and there we are. Because what happened there is you're just pushing against the object as with a typical push launch. But the difference is that the object is big enough that as the game resolves the overlap between you and the object, it happens to boost you out through the ceiling. Alright, here we're going to look at a really interesting type of launch, and this is the warp launch. So the way you cause the object overlap between the object and the player here is by warping the object. And that's a process where you make the object very large above you, and then rotate it such that as you rotate it, it disappears. And this essentially means that when the object is placed, the object placement system will kind of screw up, and it will just make the object the size of the entire level. Like huge, absolutely massive. And this of course causes it to overlap the player, because the object at this point will be overlapping like pretty much everything. Now in this specific case, in optical here, optical, as with most levels in the game, has an object deletion trigger, an object reset trigger below the level. And because the object is so big, the object will instantly clip into that trigger, and so the object will instantly be reset to normal size, and its position will be reset to right here, where it was originally placed when the level sort of loaded in. But even though it, like, before the door even has time to render at its massive size, even though it gets reset before that, it still has time to interact with the player for one frame, or not even necessarily a frame, but one tick of the in-game physics cycle. And that's long enough to give the player a massive upwards velocity boost. So like, boom. All that. And there's the door again. Yeah, so basically what you want to do is just make the object very large above you, rotate it inside yourself, then when you release it, you will launch upwards, and then the object will be reset to its original position. And this is a very useful type of launch, just because in some scenarios it's pretty easy to set up, and it allows you to launch anywhere. You don't need to clip an object into yourself using a wall or a solid surface. You can just do it anywhere quite easily, like this. Yeah, perfect. See, because it would be kind of hard or kind of inconvenient to like set the door up here and do a push launch. So it's super convenient. Just resize the door as you're walking along here, for example, and then rotate inside yourself as you're walking through here, and then jump, and then just release it, and it'll immediately launch you up to the desired height. All right, and the last variety of launch that I'm going to be looking at today is the clone launch. Now this is an interesting type of launch in that it's called a clone launch, or it's generally known as a clone launch. But it's not necessarily that it has anything to do with cloned objects specifically, but more to the fact that the only level in the main game where you can execute it is clone, because clone is the only level where you're allowed to look straight down at the floor. Usually there's a cap, a viewing angle cap, like that's around here, which makes this launch impossible. So what you want to do is make an object about like this, about this size, maybe a little bigger. You're going to look straight down at the floor, and you're going to jump, and immediately afterward click. So it's a super fast rhythm, just jump and click. Almost simultaneously, but you want to make sure you're clicking after the jump, so like that. Yeah, so jump, click, yeah, basically almost immediately. Yeah. And so if you offset it too much, so like jump, click, see, it won't work there. Or jump, click. See, it has to be pretty tightly sequenced. Yeah, so let's do it out here. You can gain quite a bit of height with this one, but it's nice because it's not like a huge amount of height typically. So similar to the warp launch, it's a nice kind of more controlled launch. It doesn't shoot you up super quickly typically. See, like so you slow down and kind of come to a stop up there, which is very handy. So yeah, that's every major launch type that's possible on the current patch of the game. There are other types of launches. For example, in the legacy patch of Superliminal or the release patch of Superliminal, you can do what's called a resize launch, which is basically just resizing an object below you, similar to the clone launch. Like similar kind of mechanic where the object clips into you because you drop it below yourself. But that's not possible on the current patch of the game, and full disclosure, I'm no expert on it. I'm not super good at it. I haven't practiced it a whole lot. So I figured I'd leave that to people who are potentially who are better at legacy patch. Or like something like jumpless. Like legacy jumpless is a category where resize launches are super useful. But of course that's not a category I know too much about. And there are also more niche types of launches that are possible on the current patch of the game, like say void launches. But void launches are so kind of unique, kind of like the strats you use them in are very specific. So I figured that those are better to cover those in specific videos, which I have. I have a couple videos on the clone void launch and the white space void launch, if you're interested in learning more about those specific strategies. But yeah, that's the four main launch types that are used in current patch runs typically. So like, if you wanted to do something like all collectibles, these four would be pretty much your main launch varieties. And yeah, hope this video is helpful. Figured I'd just make a video, just kind of a general resource on launches for people who don't know too much about them. Definitely would have been helpful to me when I was first starting out. But yeah, hope that helps. Thanks for watching.